Hello my little beauties, it's David Connolly here, the web developer extraordinaire, and this is a video pretty much following up from yesterday where I had made an appeal for some help with the documentation, the new documentation for the Trongate framework. I really appreciate the positive response from that. We've had about maybe like 15 pull requests or something like that, and it's going really well. I'd like to give you a little update about the state of the documentation and some information about the state of the Trongate framework. This is pretty much for people who are either contributing or thinking about contributing, because a lot has been learned over the last 24 hours. So let me just kick us off here with a word of thanks to Gavin Cox there, who's submitted a whole bunch of pull requests. He's always come good, especially even with the framework itself. And then we have Balaz, is it Zatic? Thank you so much. He has also been good enough to help out, and we're all very grateful. Thanks also to Dom Spencer from down there in England. He's been helping out with the framework, and it's just really nice to be getting a helping hand with this. I'm going to jump over to the documentation, if I may, and show you where we are. So you'll recall yesterday that I was talking about building new documentation, and a key part of the new documentation will be the ability to click on something like, say, a function name, and you're going to have this sort of thing appear with everything you need to know about this thing. And I can see that Gavin there has changed the styling of the little button thing, and that's pretty cool. And I think that this pop-up stuff is going to be really important for making this documentation work. By the way, once again, I'm taking this out. I repeat, I do not want my name anywhere on this documentation, so I'm slightly embarrassed that this is the example page that I landed on. Rest assured, this is not the David Connolly Roadshow, and I'll be taking that out shortly. Now, the part where we've directed most of our attention has been the helpers section, and once again, I'm really grateful for all the help that we've been getting here. Gavin especially submitted a gazillion pull requests, and he's done a lot of work, and it's looking really good. So if I take us to string helpers, you can see we've got a whole bunch here, and there's stuff here that I even forgot that we had. So we have all of this really cool stuff, and this is going to really make life so much easier for us here. And if you're looking, maybe if Gavin's looking, he's probably thinking, well, hang on, where's the validation helpers and some of the other stuff? And he might have even noticed that one or two things have moved around. For example, I think some of these were originally in the URL helper section, like get last part, for example. And you can see there's been a bit of moving around and even some things that have been deleted. And so it would appear that I've got a little bit of explaining to do. So this is slightly embarrassing, but I'm going to just say it as honestly as I can. Have any of you ever gone through life and there's been this word that everybody uses and everything? You use it, it's part of your vocabulary. But you've never really stopped and thought, what does that actually mean? An example for me is the word mortgage, to mortgage your home. I never found out what that meant until like my late 20s or something. I never knew what the word technically meant, embarrassing as it may be. And there's another one of those words in web development that I've gone a long time without knowing what it meant, and it's slightly embarrassing, but I'm going to just be honest about it. And the word is helper. When you look at documentation, you see usually a little chapter or something or a guide that talks about helpers. And I had assumed that a helper was a thing that helped you with stuff. Maybe helps you with validation or form handling or something. And we had a validation helper class, we actually had a PHP class just until a few hours ago called Validation Helper. And when you opened it, there was a PHP class called Validation Helper. But then, as I started to look at this more and more and get a chance to chat to one or two of you folks, it occurred to me that there's actually a really crystal clear definition of what a helper is as far as a framework goes. And I have been completely oblivious to this. It turns out that a helper is not just some general thing that makes your life easier. No, a helper is a function or a file that contains a bunch of functions that you can call upon to make your life easier. Now, there's a difference, as I'm sure you know, between a function and a method. They look exactly the same, but a method goes inside a class. And usually, though not always, we can add in different declarations such as, what's the phrase? Access something. Anyway, we can add public, private and protected. You may have seen that. And we can declare how these functions can be accessed, or the rules for accessing these, I should say, methods. So a function within a class is called a method, and they're inside classes, right? Now, it was our good friend Dom who said yesterday, he said, you know, when we're doing these helpers and they are functions, should we declare the scope of the function? I didn't know what he meant. And then he clarified, should we declare public, private and protected? And it took me a few minutes to wake up. I had not quite had my black coffee at that point. But then, of course, I realised, and we all realised, that public, private and protected is not required at all. In fact, it's completely redundant if we're talking about functions, because a function is just readily available. So you can just say hello, and it'll call say hello. Whereas a method, that's when you're going to have to say something like, you know, greeting, loading up, say hello. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why I'm babbling on and on and on is because I made a mistake. In the helpers directory, I had about 3 different classes there, PHP classes, inside the helpers folder. I also had a bunch of helper files, which is correct, but I had those PHP classes there. They did not belong there. The helper directory should only be for PHP functions that can be readily accessed without any need for invoking or loading other classes or whatever. These functions can just be called at any time. An example is anchor. Another is current URL. Another is URL title. These can all be accessed immediately. No need to deal with other classes or load anything, right? That's helpers. Now, I realized this only about 2 or 3 hours ago. And the moment I realized this, I suddenly realized that the documentation was going to be a mess. Because if I take you to the documentation, we had, I think quite intelligently, had a class reference here, which makes a lot of sense. The different classes, you know, you can reference them and stuff. And then we had a helpers reference here with all of the different helpers. And here they are in all their glory. But what occurred to me is that if we've got classes that are inside the helpers folder, well, it's all going to be crazy and very confusing. But luckily, I have some really good coffee here. Some might even say the best. And I have had a fantastic morning. I've taken all of those classes and stuff that were in helpers, I've moved them into the main root directory. We even held a poll on the live chat to say where should they go. And thanks for the help. And I've basically cleaned everything up, and we've now got a beautiful separation of concerns. So now if you look at the Trongate framework, and here's the latest version, now you can see that we've got TG helpers, which is where our helpers live. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 helpers here. Here they are. And they're all just functions. See? There's no classes. They're just functions. This, my friend, is exactly and precisely how helpers should be organized. This is perfect. And are you paying attention? Phil Sturgeon, one of the creators of CodeIgniter, who had said a while ago, Trongate's a mess. Well, no, it's not, because we're organizing all of this stuff perfectly. And of course, you do realize that our framework is, I cannot find a serious PHP framework that is even 25% of, well, how can I put it? Even the fastest framework I can find is 4 times slower, you know. I'm going a little bit George Bush on you there, but you know what I'm saying. So we've now got this beautiful organization. If you look in the main directory, this is where all of our classes go. And if you know this framework, you'll perhaps notice that we've now got a validation class here. You'll notice the class is not called validation helper. That was the wrong name. It's just called validation. So if I can just show you a little bit of syntax. Whereas in the past we had this validation helper set rules. Do you remember that? Well, that's now going to be this validation set rules. So we can get rid of this, okay? Some of you are probably thinking, well, this is all going to break the framework because some stuff has been moved around, you know? But it's not. If I show you this validation class here, right at the bottom of it, I've added in a little validation helper extends validation. So that means that your stuff is not going to break. I'm very, very proud of that. Really proud of it. And in terms or in keeping with our usual policies, if there's any breaking changes, the standard policy is, and we don't have many of them. I think we've only had 1 or 2 in the history of the framework. But the policy is when something like that happens, we wait 2 years before we, you know, say, okay, we've given enough warning. So the thing that I've just showed you there, that's going to be there for 2 years. None of your stuff's going to break. But in the future, when you get to the time when you'd like to just say validation, all you do is a site-wide search and replace and everything will be fine. I'll even be able to do that automatically in the module market, just so you know. So the point is, everything is beautiful and life is fine. I apologize for getting that little mix up with the helpers. I apologize for the confusion regarding what constitutes classes and helpers and stuff. I'll be entirely honest. Somehow I went through life just not knowing this stuff, you know. But there we go. There is one other thing that I failed to clarify in the last video, and I should have made this clear. Let me show you the documentation quickly. So if I take you to this sort of hidden page here, it says that the API reference provides comprehensive information regarding all of the publicly accessible APIs within the Trongate framework. It does not, however, include details on the internal mechanisms of the framework, which are beyond the intended scope of this documentation. So I think that might be badly worded. So let me explain it like a human being. When you look inside the Trongate framework's engine folder, there are tons and tons of methods in there, functions inside classes, that only get used by the framework. For example, there's one called save that pic. It gets used by the image class. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. And so what happens under normal usage conditions is you might say, okay, let's call run. Let's call the run method. It's a method that checks for validation errors, right? Fine. But that run method, as far as I can remember off the top of my head, calls a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't need to know about. It's internal stuff. So to be clear, the purpose of the documentation is not to document every single thing that's got function at the front of it, because whilst that might be a technically impressive achievement, it's not really any use to anybody because you're never going to call those things. Do you know what I mean? Instead, we're trying to just show people the stuff that they might want to use. And I have to give an apology to Gavin here, because Gavin had added a whole bunch of stuff to the validation helper, for example. Now I've moved that over to the validation class. And originally this had about 20 of these here. And if Gavin's watching, he might be saying, well, where's all of my stuff? Well, the answer is that if we look at the validation class, and here it is in front of me, all of these things like URL segment, attempt invoke callback, and so on, run file valid, handle empty file error, and so on, these are all internal. So no developer under any normal usage conditions will use these. In fact, even though the validation class is massive, so far I've only got a couple of things that we might actually use here. Maybe that'll change in the future. But the key is that you can see that we're getting this sort of really stripped down documentation happening. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's good. It was a little bit scary, but I think it's good. And I think it's going to be healthy to just show people, okay, like take form helpers, for example. Now, if you look, you'll see that it's all form button, form checkbox, you see? And okay, we've got post, that'll be useful to use or useful to know. We've got validation errors here. That I moved that to the form helpers section. I think it's more relevant here. And everything is sort of organized and streamlined. Do you know what I mean? So that's just the update on how this has been going with the documentation. I think that the helpers section is now looking excellent. It might even be finished. And you'll notice that we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 helpers here. And if we go to the framework, very clearly, you can see that we've got 6 files here. So this is fabulous. This is really, really, actually perfect organization. We've now got the business of the class reference to do. And a lot of this stuff is kind of empty. And quite frankly, there's a lot of it that I'm a little bit nervous about. And I'm probably going to take some time and go over this and see if I can figure it out myself. Interestingly, the image class is probably, well, it's one of the classes that I never wrote myself. And there's a little bit of syntax inconsistency with that one that I'm going to have to look at. You don't need to worry about it. But in terms of what's next for the documentation, let me tell you, I think that, I mean, some of this documentation has been rewritten. If I take anything up to and including the asset stuff, a lot of work has gone into this, and you can see it, you know, you can see that everything up to chapter 7 is very solid. I'm happy with it, you know. I like the tone and everything. But after we get on to assets, now it's just crazy town. I mean, it might look okay, but everything here is just coming in from the old documentation. And I suppose it's not too bad, but there's a lot of errors with this, and certainly to do with tonality. For example, here it says, we simply continue with our. Believe it or not, that's informal. That is not the correct tone for technical documentation. I know it's crazy, but it's just the way it goes. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing moving forward, and I'm inviting you to help out if you can, is I want to go through all of those pages at the documentation from assets onwards. And it's usually just a case of going through ChatGPT and saying, can you change the tonality of this so that it's more formal? And that means excluding words like you, I, me, we, things like that, you know. Normally, if you chuck that into ChatGPT, it does a fine job. And then it's just a case of swapping out the HTML and there you go. That's pretty much the next section where I think I would really appreciate it if you could help out. You're not obligated to help out, but oh, what a fantastic job you've done so far. So moving forward, I will continue with this reference section of ours here. So I'm going to continue and really have a look at this class thing and just make sure we're feeling okay about this. I think we're good with regards to helpers. The section where I'm going to ask for help contributors is just the pages here because they need work, you know. Some of them might even need deleted and the whole thing rewritten. And that's pretty much it. Now, there is one other technical thing that I have to figure out, and that is I'd like to figure out how to formalize the way that all of the different validation rules and stuff like that. And I haven't figured out how to do it because, strictly speaking, things like form validation rules, and there's loads of them, does it belong in here? Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Or does it belong somewhere else? And how do we present it? I'm not sure. I'm going to have to figure it out. But thank you. Thank you so much for everything. If anybody's wanting to really, really make a difference, pick some pages at random. I would avoid the model stuff, perhaps avoid validation stuff, but if you can just pick some other pages at random and just try and formalize it, it would really, really help. All pull requests shall be accepted. All pull requests are going to be accepted. I want to get as many contributors as I can onto this framework. And once we have this documentation down, then it's going to be onto the learning zone. And I think that's when the real takeoff is going to happen, you know. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.